Hello, everyone. This lesson is going to be on evidences for evolution. So we're going to take a look at the LEQ. What conclusions can be drawn from fossils, genetics, embryology, vestigial structures, and comparison of homologous structures. So basically, scientists have two main claims that they look at when talking about how organisms have developed and changed over time. The one is the theory of evolution by natural selection. And this was originally thought up by Charles Darwin, and it has been continuously proven correct over the years with scientists looking at evidences to support this. So you have this idea of evolution, species of organisms changing over time, and it's powered by the process of natural selection. The other claim that scientists have is that all living things are somehow related. So you'll be hearing about this idea about a tree of life, and where the base of the tree is a common ancestor that all organisms would have. One of the things when you are a scientist and you come up with these ideas and these hypotheses change into theories, which are more developed and more widespread, you have to have support for these ideas that you come up with. So what we're going to be looking at this lesson is what evidence scientists have to support these two claims. So if we look at just in general the evidence and just list it, they look at fossils, they look at genetics and DNA, they look at embryology, and they look at something called comparative anatomy. And these are where the vestigial structures and homologous structures will come into play. So these are the evidences that scientists use. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at each of these evidences. Now, the first one we're going to look at are fossils. Most of you are probably pretty familiar with a fossil. These are the preserved remains of once living things. So in a video that you're going to be watching a little bit later on, it talks about fossils of early whales, and they have fossils of these early whale-like organisms show them having hind limbs. So fossils can actually show what organisms look like. It gives an idea of past organisms and what their appearances might be. The next one is genetics or DNA with DNA. DNA is the code or the recipe for organisms, and we talked about that in our DNA and genetics unit, how DNA is basically the recipe for a living organism. The closer the DNA is, the more closely related the organisms are. So if you have an organism that is 99.9% related, that means the organism is very closely related to that other organism. DNA tests that are done with people, they look at that. So people that are related, their DNA is going to be more closely matched than somebody that is not biologically related to that person. The example that you're going to be seeing a little bit later on in a video is about a whale's DNA, and a whale's DNA is most closely related actually to a hippo. The next evidence is going to be embryology, and this is basically how species develop before they are born. So how they're developing when they're gestating or how they're developing within an egg. But an embryo is a developing baby inside an organism or inside an egg. And so one of the things is looking at developing embryos show that whales have leg buds just like humans do during early development. The difference is that human leg buds actually develop and turn into legs, while the whale's leg buds do not. All right, and the last one, comparative anatomy, the study of differences and similarities in the body structures of organisms. Scientists look at body structure to show evolution. So the more closely your body structure is, as far as with your bones and the structural part of it, the more closely related scientists would say that organism is. For example, whales have bones for their arms, their wrists, their hands, their fingers, even though we wouldn't say that whales have arms, wrists, hands, and fingers. We would say that they would have flippers or fins, but the bones that are in there are very, very similar to the bones that humans would have in their arms, wrists, hands, and fingers, that bats would have in their wings. The other thing is whales also have a pair of bones where their back legs should be. And this is going to lead us into something called a vestigial structure, which we'll look at in a little bit. So vestigial structures, a structure that no longer seems to serve a purpose for an organism. So you have whales that have a pair of bones where the back legs should be. Whales do not need back legs anymore, so therefore those little bone remnants, they aren't of any use. Okay, they don't have legs, so they don't have, those bone structures have no use. An example in a human would be something like the tailbone. A tailbone in a human has scientists, the way they would try to explain that is that the reason we have a tailbone is because at one point in time, they would say that this is a vestigial structure, and at one point in time, that would probably indicate that we had a tail. So that's kind of what a vestigial structure would be. A homologous structure are similar structures in organisms that share a common ancestry. So those would be things like the whales having bones for their arms, wrists, hands, and fingers in their flippers, where the wing of a bat would have bones that are similar for arms, wrists, hands, and fingers. And all of these organisms are mammals, so they are all sharing a common ancestry. So if we take a look at this, homologous structures, if we take a
Thanks
look
for stopping
at
by.
this.
Today we're talking about the differences between homologous structures and analogous structures. So this is a topic you may come across in biology or evolution. Let's talk about homologous structures first. So homologous structures have a similar structure, meaning their anatomy or the bone structure is similar. They have a differing function. So
for example, with this is that the similar structure would be like your arm bones, your hand bones, your finger bones. Those all have similar structures. Differing functions. In a human, it might be that we're using that as an arm. In a bat, it would be they're using it as a wing. And in a whale, they would be using those structures as a fin or a flipper.
a wing versus an arm versus a fin, for example. And they form from a common ancestor. So they have a common ancestor that gave them that structure. Analogous structures, on the other hand, have a differing structure. So they do not have a similar anatomy, but they do share a function. It's a similar function. So wings, fins, things like that. And they do not form from a common ancestor. So let's look at some examples of homologous structures. So the arm of the monkey and the fin of a narwhal. Those would be homologous structures because they are a similar structure but have a differing function. Again, the wing of a bat and the leg of a mouse would be homologous structures. Some analogous structures examples. Look at a bird, the wing of a bird versus the wing of an insect. Definitely a similar function, but not the same structure and not from a common ancestor. Again, another example, the fin or wing of a penguin and the fin of a shark. They both use them to swim with, so similar function, but a different structure. To remember homologous structures, think homo means same, and so they're from the same ancestor. And if you remember that, then you'll always know the analogous structure is the other one. That's it. If you have questions about vestigial structures, I'm going to make a video later, so I'll link that here.
All right, and so we are actually going to take a look at the vestigial structure video right now.
Thanks for stopping by. Today's video is a follow-up video from last week's homologous and analogous structures, and this week we're talking about vestigial structures. Now, vestigial structures are left over from evolution. They're a structure that used to have a function in an ancestor species, but is useless now in the modern species. So the first example we're going to look at is in humans, and that's the erector pili muscle. And the erector pili muscle is responsible for giving you goosebumps when you get the chills, or when you have an adrenal response because you're feeling anxious or scared about something, and you get goosebumps. And animals now, they still do this, but their fur puffs out. You look at bears and and monkeys and things like that. And they do it either when they're cold to stay warm or when they feel a threat to make themselves look bigger. But for us, it doesn't work that way, right?
My puppy, when she feels threatened, she gets like her hair raises, and she looks like she has like a little ridge down her back where all the hair puffs up. Right by her tail, her hair puffs up, and actually on her tail, her hair puffs up. So you can definitely tell when she is agitated because of her hair puffing up from this.
Right? We don't have enough hair to make it have an effect, so it's really useless for us. But anciently, if you look back at our ancestors, they used it for the same purpose that many animals do today. The next thing we're going to look at is the coccyx, or the tailbone. Again, in humans, it's not functional at all. It serves no purpose. If you went without it, you'd be totally fine, but it's there all the same. And again, it shows a structure left over from our ancestors which had tails. And then the last one we're going to talk about is the baleen well. The baleen well has this remaining hip joint here, which is reminiscent of its ancestors, which had forelimbs. Of course, the well has no forelimb or anything there, but it still has those bones from the hip joint. Okay, so that's all. Hopefully that helped.
All right, so those are homologous and vestigial structures. So when we look at these, if we just kind of review the evidence to support the idea of evolution, we have fossil evidence, we have genetics and DNA evidence, we have embryology and comparative anatomy with comparing similarities and differences with organisms' body structures. And within them, you should know vestigial structures are the ones that a structure that no longer seems to serve a purpose for an organism, and your homologous structures are the ones where you have a similar structure in organism that had shared a common ancestor. So we have similar structures like the bones in the arms and the wings and the fins of like whales and bats and humans. Remember, if you have any questions with anything, office hours are from 1 to 2. Thank you. Bye.